What's up, everybody? March is finally here, and we are back with another March Madness predictions video today for the upcoming NCAA tournament. If you've been enjoying the content, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, but let's jump into it. We are back on ESPN using Joe Lunardi's most up-to-date bracketology projections, but before we jump into the bracket, let's go ahead and look at who he has on his overall bracket watch and the bubble. So, top overall seed is in the Auburn Tigers. Again, as we say in every video, most dominant team, most quad one wins, has the best resume, so obviously deserves to be that number one overall seed. We can see that Georgia now has moved to the first team out. So they're on the outside looking in at this point, and Texas has been sliding a little bit now down to the last team in. And let's go ahead and take a look at the bubble. We can see that in the last four byes, we have Baylor, San Diego State, Arkansas, and Nebraska. So I see a team like Baylor who's been slipping after a tough stretch so far. Last four in is Oklahoma, Indiana, Ohio State, and Texas. So both Oklahoma and Indiana were on the outside looking in our previous bracket predictions, but they're both inside the field right now. First four out, again, Georgia, North Carolina, Boise State, and Xavier are all making pushes to try and make it into the field. And then next four out, Wake Forest has dropped out of the field so far, SMU, Cincinnati, and even Villanova. But let's go ahead and jump into the bracket. Jumping into the South region, we have the Auburn Tigers as the number one seed, taking on either Southern or American at that 16 seed. And I don't think we're going to see any Cinderellas coming out of this matchup. Give me the Auburn Tigers to move on, and they'll be facing either the 8 or 9 seed. That's Illinois versus Vanderbilt. Illinois, very talented team led by stud freshman Kasparas Yakashonis, an upcoming lottery pick in the NBA draft later this summer. But they have lost 3 straight, especially that blowout loss to Duke in Madison Square Garden, but have recently won their last 2, had a 20-point win at Michigan, which is the second best team in the Big Ten right now, according to the standings. I do like this Illinois team just for their talent alone, but they do struggle from the three-point line, only shooting 31%, and they're actually going to be going up against the Vanderbilt Commodores, who are getting hot at the right time, won their last 3 games in a row, all versus ranked opponents, currently top 20 in adjusted offensive efficiency. However, they do struggle on their three-point defense, but I don't think Illinois is going to give them any issues there because they have their own struggles shooting from deep. So I'm actually going to take Vanderbilt in this matchup. That takes us to our 5-12 matchup, either Clemson going up against Ohio State or Texas. In this Ohio State and Texas matchup, we have 2 teams that haven't really been playing their best as of late. Texas is on a 3-game losing streak, lost 6 of their last 7, while Ohio State was on a 3-game losing streak before their last win at USC. Ohio State does foul a lot, and I think the stud freshman Trey Johnson and Arthur Kaluma might be able to get to the line a bit, so I'm going to take Texas in this matchup, but then that would be Clemson versus Texas, and there's no way this Texas Longhorns team is beating the Clemson Tigers with the way they're playing right now. 12-1 in their last 13 games, their only loss coming against Georgia Tech. Clemson's veteran leadership of Chase Hunter, Ian Shefflin, they slow the game down, get quality shots. Don't forget, this Clemson team was the last team to beat the Duke Blue Devils, which are playing like maybe the best team in the country right now. I got Clemson in this matchup. Then that takes us to Michigan versus High Point. High Point coming in at the 13 seed. The Michigan Wolverines are 8-2 in their last 10 games, which, if you look at it that way, sounds pretty good, but all 8 of those wins are by 4 points or less, so they're just grinding out these games. So that can either tell you that they win close games or they're not able to pull away late. And I think if you do something like that with this High Point team, you might have issues. High Point itself is on an 11-game win streak, currently won the regular season for their conference. They are looking really good. Top 20 in points per game, scoring 82.5 points. We've seen Michigan struggle recently to score a lot of points. They like to get to the free throw line as well, might be able to get some of Michigan's big into foul trouble, which is why I'm actually taking the upset here. Give me High Point over Michigan. Then we got Marquette versus VCU. This Marquette team has been a little bit of a letdown to me this season. They've stepped it up recently, 4-1 in their last 5 games, but those are all against easier Big East opponents. Haven't been any against any really good ones. They've only beat one for sure NCAA tournament team since December 8th, and that was Creighton back in January. And they're going up against a VCU team that's on an 8-game win streak, currently leading the A10, which they overtook George Mason a few games ago. Top 40 offense, a top 25 defense. They got 4 guards that average double figures and really slow the pace down. I just really like this matchup for this VCU team. So I'm going to take the upset. The 11-seeded VCU Rams are going to be moving on to the round of 32. They'll be taking on either Kentucky or James Madison. This is impressive for James Madison to be making it back to the tournament after Mark Byington left this past year to go to Vanderbilt. And it's cool to see them both in the same side of the bracket. But they're taking on a Kentucky team that honestly has been struggling late recently, 2-3 in their last 5 games. But I really think we have to take into consideration all of the injuries they've been facing. Kerr Kriisa out for the year. Jackson Robinson was out their past couple of games. Lamont Butler has come back, but he is not playing at 100% with that shoulder. When they are at 100%, this Kentucky team can beat anyone. Again, they beat Duke as well this year, so we can't forget that. I just think Kentucky's going to be a little too much for James Madison in this one. Give me the Wildcats moving on. Mississippi State at the 7 seed, taking on the 10 seed San Diego State. Josh Hubbard is a baller. I mean, he might only be 5'11", but this sophomore can score and all 3 levels. They are 3-2 in their last 5. Most recent win was against LSU, but they're a balanced team, both on the defense and offensive side of things. Sometimes they do struggle to make and defend threes, but they're going up against a San Diego State team that's not really their identity. They've been playing well as of late, 5-1 in their last 6, and do have one of the best defenses in the country, and they like to slow the pace down as well. But I think Mississippi State is used to this, playing in the SEC against some of these other teams. So give me Mississippi State moving on in this matchup. And then we got Iowa State versus Montana. Iowa State 5-2 in their last 7. They lost to Houston and then an ugly loss at Oklahoma State. But again, they're struggling with injuries as well. They got Keyshawn Gilbert, who's been out and supposed to be coming back pretty soon, and then Curtis Jones, who just made his return. I think when Iowa State is healthy, they're one of the best teams in the nation. I just don't see Montana winning this one. So give me Iowa State Cyclones moving on to the round of 32. That takes us to our first matchup in the round of 32, Auburn versus Vanderbilt. And Auburn just doesn't lose any games, it seems like. Only lost one time in the SEC so far, and that was to Florida in a good game, close one. And I think Vanderbilt, although they're getting hot at the right time, I don't think that's going to be enough to put them over the Tigers. So give me Auburn advancing to the second weekend. Then we have Clemson versus High Point. I really like this High Point team. I think they're one of the teams that are, if they get the right matchup, are going to get an upset in the first round. But the way this Clemson team has been playing late, I don't see them getting that one in the second round. Again, the veteran leadership of Ian Shefflin and Chase Hunter is going to take this team to the next level and get them to the second weekend like they have recently. Give me the Clemson Tigers to move on to the Sweet 16. Then we got VCU versus Kentucky. I actually really like this matchup for VCU, and the main point being is I don't think Kentucky is going to be 100% going into this NCAA tournament, which is really unfortunate. If they were 100%, I'd pick them to go very far, but I think the physicality that this VCU team brings and just their great defense that they have can give trouble to the Wildcats, which is why I'm picking the Rams to move on to the Sweet 16 to be one of our first double-digit seeds there. Then we got Mississippi State taking on Iowa State. I think Iowa State's going to be healthy, unlike Kentucky. And I just don't really like this matchup for Mississippi State. They got to go against one of the best defensive teams in the nation, top 10 defense in the Cyclones, to go along with a really good offense as well. So give me the Cyclones moving on to the Sweet 16. We got Auburn versus Clemson. And I think this actually could be a really good game. But the one thing that I've been seeing from Auburn that's been extremely impressive, and we saw it in their last win, Janiah Broome can have a bad game, and this team still can win by 20. The guards, Miles Kelly, Tahad Pettiford, Chad Baker-Mazara, they are shot makers. It doesn't matter if it's defended or if it's wide open. They can hit just about any type of shot, it seems. It's been extremely impressive, and why Auburn is such a well-rounded team. I think Clemson's going to try and slow the pace down, but we've seen Auburn win it both in a shootout with Alabama and also in a slow pace type of game as well. So I got the Tigers. Moving on to the Elite Eight. Now we got the VCU Rams taking on the Iowa State Cyclones. And again, I really like this VCU team, but I think they're going to run into another team that has just as good, if not a better, defense in the Iowa State Cyclones. And I think Iowa State has a better offense. As long as this team is healthy, they're going to make a deep run in March. Give me the Cyclones to move to the Elite Eight, where they'll be taking on the Auburn Tigers. We're going to see a rematch from earlier in the season where we saw Auburn get a close win, and I think the Tigers are going to do it again. Give me the Auburn Tigers moving on to the Final Four. Moving down the bracket to the West region, we can see Houston has the #1 overall seed as Florida lost to Georgia recently, so they've been bumped down to a 2 seed. In our first matchup, it's Houston versus the 16 seed Omaha. Omaha has had a great story, some great traditions, but I don't see Cougars having any issues in this one. Give me Houston moving on to the round of 32. That takes us to BYU versus Utah State. Kevin Young, in his first year with BYU, taking them to the tournament, has some great players on his side as well, especially Igor Dimon, the freshman, kind of do-it-all point guard for them. They've won 6 straight, specifically winning against Kansas and at Arizona, 10-2 in their last 12, so they're trending upwards in the right time of the year. A top 15 offense, but they do struggle to defend the 3, but they're going up against a Utah State team that has gotten blown out in their last 2 games by an average of 22 points. They're a great offense in their own right, but not that good of a defense. I think this is going to be a shootout, but give me BYU moving on in this matchup to take their Big 12 foe in Houston. Then we have Oregon versus Drake. Drake has been one of my favorite upset picks in this one, but I don't really like this matchup. Drake has the slowest adjusted tempo in the country, and they get really good quality shots, but they're going up against an Oregon team that it just seems like they're always up to the task when they play good teams. They were on a 5-game losing streak, but turned that into a 5-game winning streak, including an impressive win at Wisconsin in OT after Jackson Shellstad hit that incredible shot. They're top 40 in offensive rating and defensive rating according to KenPom. I think the Ducks move on in this matchup. That takes us to St. John's versus Liberty in the 4 versus 13 matchup. I say this in all my videos, but it's one of the most impressive stats. Rick Pitino and the Johnnies have 4 losses this year, but they're by a combined 7 points. They are in every single game, win or lose. They just outright won the Big East regular season title. They're second in defensive rating and 12th in rebounds per game. The one knock I have for the Johnnies is they're shooting from 3, currently 30%, but I don't think they're going to have much issues with Liberty. A good team, they're 6-1 in their last 7, and they're really good at defending the 3, but again, St. John's gets downhill and gets into the paint, and I think the Liberty Flames might have some issues with that. Give me St. John's and Rick Pitino to advance in this one. Then we got the 6th seed St. Mary's taking on either Oklahoma or Indiana at the 11th seed. In that first matchup between Oklahoma and Indiana in the first 4, we have 2 teams where one is trending the wrong direction in Oklahoma, 1-7 in their last 8. They just keep taking loss after loss in the SEC, going up against an Indiana team that's on a 3-game winning streak, won the 4 of their last 5, including a win at Michigan State, who is playing great basketball right now, and Purdue. I think Indiana wins that matchup, but then going up against St. Mary's, Indiana is very talented with a lot of transfers, Umar Ballo, Miles Reese to name a few, but St. Mary's knows how to win. 7-game winning streak, just locked down the WCC regular season title against Gonzaga, beat Gonzaga in both matchups, one of the best defenses in all of college basketball, 11th in defensive rating and adjusted defensive efficiency, led by star seniors Augustus Marshallonis and Mitchell Saxon. I like their size. I like their team. Give me the Gales moving on against Indiana. Then we got Wisconsin versus Chattanooga. John Tonji, again, still playing great basketball. One of the best offenses in the country. They were on a 5-game winning streak, but have been 1-2 recently. Losses with Oregon and at Michigan State. Taking on a Chattanooga team that I don't think anyone should take lightly. Could be an upset pick in March Madness this year. 11-game winning streak. Won their conference as well. They like to share the basketball. They're top 20 in assists per game. But however, they're not the best defense. And when you're going up against a Wisconsin team, that's the one thing you need to do is play really good defense because this team can score in bunches. Give me John Tonji and the Badgers moving on against Chattanooga. Then we got Louisville taking on against West Virginia. Two great stories here and first-year head coaches with their programs. Pat Kelsey with Louisville, Darian DeVries with West Virginia. Pat Kelsey, what he has done for the Cardinals has been sensational. They're right up there in the ACC, tied for second with Clemson right now and one game behind Duke. 7-game winning streak currently, top 25 in offensive and defensive rating. Just such a great team-oriented mind and culture that Pat Kelsey has built there. And Chucky Hepburn has been awesome. Just recently dropped 37 points in their last game. They're taking on a West Virginia team that's tough-nosed, defensive-minded. That's what West Virginia is known for. And they got a guy in Javon Small that just does it all. However, they are 2-4 in their last 6. I think with the injuries that's plaguing them, especially to Tucker DeVries, this is going to be a hard matchup. Pat Kelsey will not lose this first-round matchup. Give me the Cardinals moving on. They'll be taking on either Florida or Central Connecticut. Central Connecticut, longest win streak in the country currently, actually, with 12 games. NEC champions, but Florida is just going to be a little too much for them. They're 7-1 in their last 8. They did take that loss to Georgia, as I mentioned earlier, but did beat A&M recently. Top 5 offensive rating, top 10 defensive rating. I love the numbers and the metrics behind this team, as well as the players. I think Florida is going to make a really good run in this March Madness this season. Give me the Gators moving on in this matchup. Moving back up, we see Houston versus BYU, 2 Big 12 teams, so I'm not sure if we're going to see a matchup like this, but with all the Big 12 and SEC teams that are making it, maybe so. I think BYU, this is where their run ends. Houston, with the improved offense, specifically the three-point shooting that LJ Cryer and Emmanuel Sharp have been doing this season, just one of the best three-point shooting teams to go along with one of, if not the best defenses. They're going to be a tough out, and I don't think BYU can hang with them, so give me Houston winning this matchup. Oregon versus St. John's. I think this is going to be a really close game. As I mentioned earlier, Oregon plays really well against good teams, it seems. But something about this St. John's team and the energy that they've been bringing, not only to the city of New York, but just to the sport as a whole. Rick Pitino in his second year, we all know, great. And I really like what the Johnnies have going right now. So give me St. John's moving past Oregon. Then we got St. Mary's going up against Wisconsin in our next round. This really is great defense versus great offense. I think Wisconsin takes this one. I don't know if St. Mary's, even though they have a great defense, can score with them. We saw them score with Gonzaga, but I think Wisconsin just brings a different type of energy on the defensive end than Gonzaga does, which is why I like the Badgers in this matchup. And then we have Louisville going up against Florida Gators. As I mentioned earlier, I really like this team. Louisville has some guys, Chucky Hepburn, Terrence Edwards, Rain Smith, who's been shooting extremely well. But I just like what Florida has better. Walter Clayton, Elijah Martin, Will Riley in the guard spot. Alex Condon, House, those guys have been playing great in the front court as well. So give me Florida. And then we have the Sweet 16. Houston taking on St. John's. What a great game this would be against 2 tough-nosed teams. Great defenses in Houston and St. John's. But I think Houston has a little more on the offensive end, which might give St. John's some problems. So give me Kelvin Sampson and the Cougars to move past Rick Pitino in this matchup, and a close one to move on to the Elite 8, where they'll be taking on either Florida or Wisconsin. And I think this would be a great game as well. I love these matchups, even though this region so far has been pretty chalk in my predictions. I really like all these matchups. I think John Tonji could be a problem for the Florida Gators, but it just seems like the Florida Gators have just a few more dudes than Wisconsin does. I will mention John Blackwell, Max Klesmit. They've been playing great as well for the Badgers, but I just really like what Florida has been cooking up. Even with that loss against Georgia at Georgia, I really like how this season has played out for the Florida Gators so far. So give me the Gators to move on in this matchup. Well, they'll be taking on the number 1 seed Houston Cougars in the Elite 8. And again, a great game. We've seen Houston play extremely well against SEC teams earlier in the year, and then obviously in the Big 12, they've been phenomenal, running away with the Big 12 championship. Both of these teams have really good resumes. Houston's 7-4 in the Quad 1. Florida 6-4 in quad one. Neither of them have any losses outside of that first quadrant. I really think this is just going to be an extremely close game between the two of them. Both teams have really good offenses. Houston 8th in offensive ranking, Florida 4th in offensive ranking, Houston 3rd in defensive ranking, Florida 7th in defensive ranking. So the numbers are really close right there. Florida likes to play a bit faster than Houston, so I think really what's going to decide this game is who controls the pace, but I think it might be Florida in this one, and I think they have a few more guys that are shot makers. So give me the Gators moving on in a close one to take on Auburn in the Final Four. Jumping to the other side of the bracket, we have the East region, where in our first matchup, we see the number 1 seed Duke take on either Marist or Southeast Missouri State at the 16 seed. Duke has been absolutely phenomenal as of late. I don't see them losing this matchup. Give me the Blue Devils to move on. Then we got New Mexico versus UConn, a very exciting game. New Mexico led by Donovan Dent, 20 points per game scorer. They were on an 8-game winning streak until they've gone 1-2 in their last 3, so slipping recently. Losses at Boise State and at San Diego State. They're a really high-scoring team, top 20 in points per game, and they play with the 4th fastest tempo in the nation, going up against a UConn team that's 3-1 in their last 4 games, so playing better. That loss was against St. John's, so the best team in the Big East so far. They have a great offense as well, top 15 for theirs. However, they do struggle to guard the 3 and not foul, which is where New Mexico could get them, but I'm just going to trust Dan Hurley in this one. UConn, back-to-back national champions. Don't know if that's going to be this season, but I don't think they lose in the round of 64. Give me the UConn Huskies to move on in this matchup. That takes us to the 5-12 matchup of Missouri taking on Yale. Missouri has been surprising this season. Dennis Gates' team obviously struggled last season, but this year they've been playing extremely well. However, they are 1-2 in their last 3 with losses against Arkansas and Vandy. They are a top 5 offense. They score a lot of points and shoot the ball extremely well. They get to the line at a good clip also, but defense is not their strong suit. And they're taking on a Yale team that has just been dominating the Ivy League. 12-1, won the conference regular season title already. And don't forget, this team has played some good teams as well. Played Purdue earlier this season, only lost by 8 at Purdue. So in a tough environment, we know they're battle tested. Top 20 in points per game and 3-point percentage, so they shoot the ball extremely well. One thing I really like about this Yale team is they're also very good at rebounding, top 25 in the nation in that one. I'm actually going to give the win to Yale in this one. I like what Missouri's done so far, but Yale is one of my picks that it's going to be hard for me to get away from them as one of my upset picks in the upcoming March Madness. Give me the Yale to move on and take on either Purdue or Lipscomb. Purdue, they were on a 4-game losing streak recently until their win versus UCLA. They're a great offensive team, but they're just terrible defending inside the paint. They're 339th in the nation in defending the 2. I think this is a big part with how Zach Edey is no longer there. And they're playing a Lipscomb team that is very disciplined, doesn't turn the ball over, rebounds well, slows the pace down, which is a little scary when you think of a Purdue team that got upset a few years back against a team like this. But I am going to give them nod to Purdue in this one, but I think it's going to be a close one if this were to happen. But give me the Boilermakers moving on to the round of 32. Then we have UCLA taking on UC San Diego, another one of my favorite upset picks, the Tritons out of the Big West. Eric Olin has this team playing extremely well, 11-game winning streak, 16-2 in their conference, top 50 in offensive and defensive rating according to KenPom. The one thing I really like about this team is they force turnovers and they don't turn the ball over themselves. I think they can get some turnovers against this UCLA team, and they slow the pace down. That's always going to shorten the game, make it a closer matchup. And they're playing a UCLA team that's 2-3 in their last 5 losses to Purdue, Minnesota, Illinois. They play at a slower tempo as well and defensive-minded. They're one of the better ones at forcing turnovers, but again, as I mentioned earlier, UC San Diego ranks really high in terms of not losing the ball. So I'm going to give the edge to the Tritons on this one for an upset pick over UCLA. Then we have Texas Tech taking on Towson. Grant McCaslin, what he's done there in Lubbock has been great this season, led by JT Toppin. They're 4-2 in their last 6, and I will say the 2 losses are mainly due to injuries, in my opinion. They got a top 10 offense, top 30 defense. JT Toppin has been the points leader in 6 of the last 7 with multiple 20 points, even a 30-point game as well. They're playing a Towson team that just locked up the conference champion for the regular season and the CAA. Pat Scary's team has been playing extremely well. However, when you're looking at these teams in terms of rankings, Texas Tech is 7th in the net, Kimpom and Bart Torvik, where Towson is around 150 in all 3 of those. So I don't think the Red Raiders will have too much trouble. Give me them moving on in this matchup. Then we have Memphis versus Arkansas. Arkansas bumping up to the 10 seed. We saw them in the first 4 in a few of our other brackets, but now as a 10 seed, so safely in. So far, taking on a Memphis team that has been playing well recently in the American. However, that conference is not as good as it used to be. Memphis 11-1 in their last 12. They had that OT loss at Wichita State, but their biggest issues are rebounding and turnovers. I think this Arkansas team can get up and get after them. However, Arkansas have been struggling recently as well. 3-4 in their last 7. They just lost to South Carolina by 19, which is a really bad loss for the SEC standards. But they are a very athletic team. I think Arkansas can get a win. So give me Arkansas knocking off Memphis in the first round. And they'll be taking on either Tennessee or Norfolk State. Don't think we're going to have too much of a conversation here. Norfolk State has played well this season. Seems like they always make the tournament. But Tennessee just came off of a big win against Alabama off that Jemai Mashak buzzer beater 3. Currently on a 4-game win streak. Best defense in the nation. I just like Tennessee Volunteers in this matchup. So give me Tennessee moving on. Then we move to our round of 32. Duke versus UConn. What a great matchup this would be in terms of history of programs. But I think Cooper Flagg and the way that this Duke team has been playing, UConn cannot match that level. They're on a 6-game win streak since their loss against Clemson, with their average win being 31 points. Multiple 100-point scoring games so far, averaged 95 points per game in that span. Only team in Kimpom's rankings that's top 5 in both offense and defensive rating, and jumped Auburn as the number 1 team in Kimpom's rankings. I think Duke is going to have a very good time in the NCAA tournament. Give me them moving on to the Sweet 16 to take on either Yale or Purdue. And this is where I'm thinking things might get a little interesting. Yale kind of seems like a team that could make a run in March to me. Again, as I mentioned earlier, dominated the Ivy League, played Purdue earlier, only lost by 8 at Purdue. Think this game more of a neutral site. If this were to happen, it says Seattle, so definitely far for both teams. I think Yale is going to get them in this time. So give me Yale to move on to the Sweet 16. Then we have UC San Diego taking on Texas Tech. Although I like what UC San Diego has done this year, I think Texas Tech is a very underrated team out of the Big 12. Currently a 3 seed, but could move up if they do extremely well in the Big 12 tournament. So give me the Red Raiders to move on in this matchup. And then between Arkansas and Tennessee, I think Arkansas can only win maybe 1, maybe 2 games in the NCAA tournament with the team that they have. We've seen them play extremely well against good teams, especially against Auburn. They're at Auburn. They were really close in that matchup. But Tennessee, I feel like we've seen something from them, especially beating Alabama, scoring a decent amount of points as well. If Tennessee can score the ball, they're very dangerous, which is why I like the Volunteers in this matchup. Then we have Duke versus Yale in our first Sweet 16 matchup in the East. And I'm really liking the way this is shaping out for the Blue Devils. Yale, a really good team, but just not up to the talent that Duke has. And it just seems like when one guy has an off day, 3 others are on, and it doesn't matter who it is. I love the Blue Devils and how they've been playing as of late, so I got to give it to the Blue Devils to move on to the Elite 8. Then we have Texas Tech versus Tennessee. Really good matchup. Big 12 versus SEC. Texas Tech has really good ratings. 7th in net, Kimpom and Bart Torvik, as I mentioned earlier, taking on a Tennessee team that's 5th in the net, 5th in Kimpom, and 6th in Bart Torvik. Both teams have really good records in terms of wins in Quad 1. Texas Tech at 6-5, Tennessee at an impressive 10-5. but I do like the Red Raiders in this matchup. I feel like they just have a little more on the scoring side of things. Tennessee winning 6 games in a row, scoring a lot of points is really hard for me to see. I just feel like this team really isn't built for March. Great defense, but the offense scares me a little too much to take them. So give me the Red Raiders in this matchup, going up against the Duke Blue Devils. And in this matchup, we see two teams that are actually pretty similar in terms of pace of play. The adjusted tempo numbers are extremely close for the two of them, but I just can't get over this Duke team, not only with the way they score the basketball, but the way they defend. I think everybody gets so caught up behind all the highlights, Cooper Flag, the numbers, the amount of points they're scoring. But this defense that Duke has is incredible. One of the biggest teams in all of college basketball in terms of height, and this Texas Tech team actually runs a little bit on the smaller side. I think that could give them problems. So give me the Blue Devils to move on to the Final Four. Jumping down to our last group, we have the Midwest region, where we see the number 1 seed Alabama Crimson Tide taking on Bryant at the 16 seed. Bryant loves to play fast, very up-tempo team, but they're playing against an Alabama team that plays even faster. However, the Crimson Tide is 2-3 in their last 5 games, all against ranked opponents. They're number 1 in tempo. I just don't see the Crimson Tide losing a game that's going to be played at their speed. So give me Alabama moving on in this matchup. Then we have Creighton going up against Gonzaga, which would be a really fun matchup. RJ Nembhard, Gonzaga's point guard, previously at Creighton before transferring to the Bulldogs. Creighton, they had won 9 in a row before going 2-3 in their last 5. They're top 50 in both offensive and defensive efficiency, according to Bart Torvik. But taking on a Gonzaga team that's been playing extremely well as of late, 7-1 in their last 8. That loss being against St. Mary's, who got them both times this year. They're top 10 in offensive efficiency and rating, second in points per game and assists per game, so can score the basketball and like to share the ball as well. I think this Creighton team, the one way they have in this one is we know what Kalkbrenner is going to give you, but if Stephen Ashworth plays well, they have a chance. If not, I don't think that team's going to have much success. I just like what the Gonzaga Bulldogs have in terms of players. RJ Nembhard, as I mentioned earlier, Graham Ike, Nolan Hickman, Khalif Battle. They can just hit you in so many ways. And as well, a couple of these guys are hot. I think it's going to be a tough out. So give me Gonzaga in this matchup. Then we got Maryland versus McNeese. Will Wade and McNeese State Cowboys have been great in the Southland Conference, 18-1. Currently on an 8-game winning streak, locked up that regular season title already. They slow the pace down and force turnovers. And this Maryland team, although they've been playing extremely well, 5-1 in their last 6 games, all 5 starters averaging double figures, they don't have a lot of depth, which is a little scary when you go into March. I feel like they have those 5 starters that play heavy minutes. And if you're trying to win a lot of games in a row, that could be an issue. But I don't think they have a problem in this matchup. I think it's going to be a close one. I do like McNeese, but I like Maryland a little more. Give me them moving on to the round of 32 to take on either Arizona or Akron in that 4 versus 13 matchup. I mentioned in my previous videos, I really like Arizona, although trusting them in March is a little hard to do as what we've seen in the past couple of seasons. Also, they're 2-4 in their last 6 with their only wins coming against a struggling Baylor team and a Utah team that's not in the NCAA tournament conversation right now. However, they're probably one of Tommy Lloyd's more balanced teams, currently number 18 in offense and defense, going up against an Akron team that plays really fast, one of the most up-tempo teams in all of college basketball. They're solid from inside the arc and behind it. Also just locked up their conference championship as well. But I'm going to give Tommy Lloyd and his weapons the edge a little bit. Caleb Love, Jaden Bradley, I feel like are different makers for Arizona. I think they'll push them past to make it to at least the round of 32. Then we get into Kansas as the 6th seed taking on Nebraska at the 11th seed. Kansas, what a season has been. Just a struggle. 2-1 in their last 3, though. And that one loss coming up against Iowa State, which was only by 5 points, but it was at home. Again, this team was the preseason number 1 team in America for a reason, and that's just due to all the transfers they added. However, those transfers doesn't seem like they've panned out, but going up against a Nebraska team that's currently on a 3-game losing streak and lost 4 of their last 5. They're not the best at defending the 3, although I don't know if Kansas is going to give them much issues there. I just think I have to trust Bill Self in this one, similar to how I trust Danny Hurley a little bit. So give me Kansas to move on in this matchup to either take on Texas A&M or Utah Valley. Utah Valley, they're the team that's winning the WAC currently over GCU, which I'm interested to see what happens in that conference championship, because I think if GCU makes the field, there'll be an intriguing upset pick. But right now, I don't really like Utah Valley in this matchup. Texas A&M, although they've lost their last 4 games, they're number 1 in offensive rebounding. And when you're playing these smaller teams in mid-majors, I think that could be an issue. Also, you got a guy like Wade Taylor and Zurich Phelps. I just expect one of them to have a good game in this matchup. So give me A&M to move on over Utah Valley. Then we have Ole Miss versus Baylor. Ole Miss lost 3 in a row before their 3-point win versus OU recently. They struggle with rebounding, free throws, defending the 3, but going up against a Baylor team that's been struggling in their own right. Although they still have a top 15 offensive rating according to KenPom, they've had a lot of injuries they've had to manage this year. Jeremy Roach was out a little bit. Langston Love. Josh Ojinawa is out for the season, so a lot of loss of depth there at the front court. They're 1-3 in their last 4 with some ugly losses at Colorado and at Cincinnati, but I'm going to trust the talent. VJ Edgecombe, Jeremy Roach, we've seen him play well in March. I think they're going to get past Ole Miss, actually, so give me Scott Drew and the Baylor Bears to get a little upset in this one, but that might not be going on for too long because they got to take on Michigan State or Robert Morris. Michigan State, great season so far. Tom Izzo has been coaching his butt off for the Spartans right now. One of the best defenses in all of the country. And although they don't shoot the 3 well, only 29% from 3, they hold opponents to 28% from 3, so it doesn't seem like that needs to be as big of an issue as it seems. Currently on a 5-game winning streak versus 5 of the best Big Ten teams and currently leading the league as well. Michigan State over Robert Morris all day. Then we have Alabama versus Gonzaga. Talk about a very fast-paced, up-tempo game. This game is probably going in the 90s or 100s. I just like Alabama in this one. I think their offensive weapons are just a little more than Gonzaga, and I think Gonzaga's streak of making it to the Sweet 16 ends here. Then we have Maryland taking on Arizona. In my last video, I had Arizona going pretty far, but I do like the front court that Maryland has. Derek Queen, Julian Reese. I just like that a little better than what Arizona's coming with Trey Townsend, Vasar, Awaka. So I'm going to trust Derek Queen, the stud freshman for the Terrapins, and also Jacoby Gillespie, who's been playing great, to get past Arizona in this matchup and move on to the Sweet 16 against Alabama. Then we have Kansas versus A&M. And although I was talking about Kansas earlier, just kind of struggling in this season, I think Texas A&M might struggle as well. They are very inconsistent, especially when it comes to shooting the basketball. They're 313th in effective field goal percentage. And Kansas right now, they are looking at a 59th in offensive ranking, but they do have a good defense. Currently 6th in defensive ranking, especially with Hunter Dickinson holding down the post. So I'm actually going to take Bill Self and the Jayhawks in this one, where they'll be either taking on Scott Drew and the Baylor Bears or Tom Izzo and the Michigan State Spartans. And I think Michigan State, they've just obviously had the better season. I don't see Baylor making it past the round of 32. So give me Tom Izzo and Michigan State making a run in March, moving on to the second weekend. Then we have Alabama versus Maryland. 2 teams with some really impressive talent, as I mentioned earlier. Derek Queen from the Maryland side, but Mark Sears, Aiden Holloway, Grant Nelson, Cliff Omarui from the Alabama side. And they're tied for second in the toughest conference in all of college basketball in the SEC. Very high-scoring team, and honestly not the worst at defense. They're 37th currently in defensive ranking, and I think this is where Maryland's going to tire out, though. As I mentioned earlier, 5 starters play very heavy minutes, so give me the Crimson Tide to move on to the Elite 8, where they will either be taking on Kansas or Michigan State. Bill Self and a struggling Jayhawks team making it to the Sweet 16 in this bracket, but that's as far as they go. I think Michigan State, with that defense and We've seen them in some games shoot it well from the 3-point range. So if they can get something like that going, I think they can make a deep run. So I'm going to pick Michigan State in this matchup to beat the Jayhawks and take on the Alabama Crimson Tide in the Elite Eight. And in this matchup, we're going to see a very defensive-minded team in Tom Izzo that's very disciplined, going up against an Alabama team that just shoots as many threes as they can, it seems like. But in this matchup, I'm actually going to be taking the Michigan State Spartans. Jaden Akins and Jace Richardson are difference makers. Coming into the season, I don't know if we expected them to be as good as they are. Cohen Carr, one of the most fun athletes to watch in all of college basketball. I think Alabama at some point is going to go cold, and when you're playing against a team like Michigan State that has great defense, I think this might be the point where they do. So give me the Spartans. Moving on to the Final Four. So in our Final Four, we have Auburn, Florida, Duke, and Michigan State. And in our first matchup, we have the two SEC teams, number 1 and number 2, Auburn Tigers taking on the Florida Gators, where earlier this season we saw Florida win at Auburn, and I think it'd be another great game. They match up well in terms of talent. We got Janiah Broome and Alex Condon going at it in the front court. Walter Clayton, Elijah Martin, Will Riley, trio of guards for Florida, taking on Chad Baker-Mazara, Tahad Pettiford, Miles Kelly, Denver Jones for the Auburn Tigers. Again, as of late, it just seems like Auburn doesn't take losses besides that one Florida loss. They've got the toughest strength of schedule, number 1 in offensive efficiency, and as I mentioned earlier, it's not just Janiah Broome. This team is extremely well-rounded. Going up against a Florida team that seems to be a little more well-rounded than people thought. I feel like early on it was Walter Clayton, but now we're seeing breakouts from Elijah Martin. Will Riley had a really big game against Georgia, even though they did lose in that one. In terms of the rankings, both teams have great rankings. They're top 5 in net, KenPom, Bart Torvik. But when we look at the resume, Auburn by far has the better one. 16-2 in Quad 1, the most Quad 1 wins out of anyone in the country by far. They have the best offensive rating in the country according to KenPom, and obviously a top 10 defense as well, where Florida is 4 in offense and 7 in defense. I think if this matchup were to happen again, I'd have to give the nod to the Auburn Tigers. So give me Auburn to move on to the national championship game. Well, they'll be taking on either Duke or Michigan State. Great programs going at it with the Blue Devils and the Spartans, both leading their conferences. Duke with the ACC, Michigan State with the Big Ten. I feel like Duke, we all expected that they were going to be here, but Michigan State has been a little bit of a surprise. Duke, number 1 in KenPom right now, and actually has the second best KenPom rating ever. And Michigan State, they're top 10, 9th currently in KenPom. In terms of the resumes, we have the Duke Blue Devils that are currently 6-3 in Quad 1, and then 20-0 in Quads 2 through 4. Where Michigan State, they have a pretty impressive resume, 10-3 in Quad 1, but they are 5-2 in Quad 2, and then 9-0 in Quads 3 and 4. I just really trust this Duke team, and maybe a little bit to a fault, to be completely honest. What they have been doing in the ACC has been absolutely remarkable. Even when you think some of these games are trap games, or even when you think they're not going to wake up for the moment because it's a team that they should beat, they are just absolutely beating all of these teams down, and no one has a shot. Clemson really seems like the only time that they've been tested, and I think in this one, I got to give it the edge to the Duke Blue Devils. So I'm going to have them moving on to the national championship game, where we get the rematch that we all want. Duke Blue Devils taking on the Auburn Tigers, what everyone seems to say is the 1 and 2 teams in the nation. And I think in this matchup, it would be a close one and it would be a classic. We got Cooper Flagg taking on Janiah Broome, the 2 front runners for the Player of the Year. Also, you have the stud freshmen and Con Knipple and Kaman Malawach going up against Auburn's own stud freshman and Tahad Pettiford, someone that needs to be talked about more. And in this matchup, again, I think it'd be a close one, but I'm going to give the edge to the Duke Blue Devils. I think Cooper Flagg becomes the National Player of the Year, and give me the Blue Devils to beat Auburn and become national champions. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. We'll be posting a lot more content in terms of March Madness and the upcoming NCAA tournament. Leave a comment. Who would your Final Four be in this bracket prediction, and who do you like to be the national champion at the end of the season? We'll see you in the next one.